We are about to see how ancient Egyptians built the pyramids using man-made stones which look exactly like natural rocks. The limestone blocks were cast on the site with a brilliant technology called arikat, recently rediscovered.
My name is Walter Broderick. My colleagues and I are curious people, and we like investigating some of the unsolved enigmas of past history. At present, we've been researching the techniques used in pyramid building, and this has brought us here to Saqqara, some 12 kilometers south of Cairo. The name Saqqara means the one who opens and shows the way. And the name is very appropriate because here stands the very first pyramid ever built in Egypt, the Great Step Pyramid, constructed 5,000 years ago.
How, you might ask, were the ancient Egyptians able to build such enormous monuments?
Most Egyptologists believe the Egyptians left almost no record of their building technique. In fact, however, that's not quite true.
There do exist certain hieroglyphs which, when properly understood, reveal the secret of pyramid construction. And that secret can be discovered also, or if you prefer, can be confirmed, by closely examining the stone blocks from which the earliest pyramids were made. In our times, the one man who has taken a really good look at those stones is Professor Joseph Davidovits, a celebrated French geochemist who conducts most of his scientific investigations at his Geopolymer Institute at Saint-Quentin, not far from Paris. Dr. Davidovits has taken a special interest in the Egyptian pyramids and has combined a new approach, a chemist's approach, to hieroglyphic interpretation with in-depth research on the structure and composition of the stone blocks and cements used in pyramid building. As a result, and after long experimentation, he has published a fascinating theory about how the construction of these giant man-made mountains must have been carried out.
The hieroglyphs we see here in this stele tells the story, the autobiography of a very successful scribe and sculptor named Hirtisen, who lived during the second millennium before Christ. Here, Hirtisen claims he possesses a formula for molding and reproducing any kind of object or statue in a material that fire cannot consume, nor water dilute, and that he will not reveal the secret knowledge except to his eldest son, and then only after Pharaoh himself gives him permission to do so. He talks about casting malleable stone paste into a mold to make a stone statue. This text proves that there existed in ancient Egypt a secret alchemy for casting stone, which has been the exclusive property of a closed circle of priests.
Dr. Davidovits found more evidence to support his suspicion that the ancient Egyptians used a mineral formula to produce artificial blocks that looked exactly like natural stone. He found the evidence here on Sehel Island on the Nile, on this great rock known as the Famine Stele. Its hieroglyphs contain information dating from the period of Pharaoh Djoser in the 3rd millennium BC.
The written text tells the story of how Pharaoh Djoser placated the god Num and thus put an end to a great famine, hence the name the Famine Stele. More importantly for us, these hieroglyphs relate the revelations of Imhotep, the priest-scientist, great alchemist and chief architect of Pharaoh Djoser. It was Imhotep who designed and built the Step Pyramid.
Here, Imhotep describes the mineral ingredients of the chemical formula he used for fabricating the moulded stones of that pyramid, the first ever built in Egypt.
I was able to decipher the list of diverse rocks and mineral ores used by Imhotep to create man-made stones. I came across some key expressions, a combined word pronounced Ari-kat. Ari is the past participle of a verb meaning to make, to fashion, and it is symbolized by an eye alongside a seated human figure which represents the man who does the work. The addition of a second word, kat, two hands held aloft, gives a new meaning, man-made. Ari-kat, therefore, means created by man. That is, when associated with minerals, something processed or synthetically made. Here we see the verb glossy, meaning to build by packing material into molds. Its illustration is extremely clear.
Following up a hunch, Professor Davidovits carried out an X-ray diffraction analysis on samples of rocks taken from the Great Pyramid at Giza, and he found a surprising thing.
These fossil shells are normally found in sedimentary horizontal layers, yet in the stones of the pyramids at Giza, I found them in disarray, in all orientations, jumbled, as if they were artificially mixed with some kind of basalt in all directions. Another phenomenon I observed in the sample of the pyramid stone was the presence of air bubbles, organic fibers, perhaps hair, foreign materials not commonly found in natural limestone. These could be a proof that the stones were man-made. Based on the information found on that stele and on my researches into antique cement, I reproduced in my lab a block of molded stone, identical to the one of the millions used to build the first pyramid ever made. To do this, I used the same ingredients described by Imhotep.
We are now getting close to a logical answer as to how the pyramids were built. It seems that all was done with the long-lost Ari-kat technology. So let us use our imaginations for a while, and we will see with our own eyes how the architect and alchemist Imhotep, using the formula for artificial block making which he had discovered, actually designed and directed the building of this miracle of engineering, the Step Pyramid at Saqqara, erected 5,000 years before our time.
The amazing story of the alchemist who built a pyramid began here at Saqqara with the building of the step pyramid, comprised of 1 million tons of stone and erected on the hard limestone plateau that stretches northwards from here to Giza.
The Egyptians always began to construct their great monuments and temples at the moment of a summer equinox, due to their belief that when day and night were of equal length, then good and evil were also in balance. On the night of the equinox, then, Pharaoh Djoser, accompanied by Imhotep and other priests, and also by Seshat, the priestess of the divine books, and a vast throng of Egyptian people, gathered here at midnight to perform a ceremony known as Putzer. The sowing of the seed of the pyramid and of its temples. They not only consecrated the place to God, but also established the pyramid's precise orientation and the alignment of its axis in accordance with the position of the stars. That night, Djoser and Imhotep stretched a cord between 2 golden rods in the direction of the polar star, while the priestess Seshat, with a golden hammer, nailed them down, defining the axis of the pyramid and its temples. They also defined the exact limits of what was to be the enclosure wall by placing a gold brick in each of the 4 corners and determined the future pyramid's central point. Some days after the Putzer ceremony, Imhotep began construction.
First, he ordered his men to open this shaft in the center. It remains intact to this day, almost 30 meters deep, the equivalent of an underground 10-story building.
But that is not all. Beneath the earth, at the base of this 7-meter square shaft, the ancient Egyptian architect carried out almost 3 miles of stone and built a series of corridors in inner chambers in a mysterious but evidently deliberate and meaningful pattern.
The significance of these inner chambers has puzzled archaeologists for generations. This mysterious hive of galleries and chambers was decorated with enamel tiles. As far as we know, the first ever made by man.
In addition to all this, some 30,000 stone vessels of the utmost perfection were found in these subterranean chambers.
There are unique and enigmatic hard stone vessels made of slate, metamorphic schist, diorite and basalt. Some of these materials are harder than iron. One wonders how they could have been shaped. No sculptor today would even attempt to work with such material.
The vessels which have been found inside the tomb underneath the Djoser pyramid are not carved stone vessels. These are molded stone vessels.
If we accept the professor's assertion that these objects were cast in moulds, then it's even easier to believe that the stone blocks used by Imhotep to build this first pyramid were also moulded. In fact, they bear all the hallmarks of having been produced in serial form rather than individually shaped and carved. And if we take into account the physical conditions of soil here at Saqqara, then the hypothesis put forward by Dr. Davidovits makes a lot of sense.
"60 million years ago, most of the land of Egypt was under the sea. All marine organisms such as algae, seeds, shells, small shells, fish skeletons gently settled down to the bottom of the sea, forming a mud which condensed itself to a solid rock that we call today limestone."
Imhotep located a quarry of soft limestone just 1 kilometre from the pyramid construction site. It was ideal. He had a strong base to support the immense weight of the pyramid and soft limestone to provide material for the modular stones, millions of them, which he needed to build it.
The soft limestone can be very easily disaggregated either by applying pressure or by diluting it in water. When water is applied to this soft limestone, we have a separation between the clay, the shells, and the other components of the limestone, yielding a mud. In this limestone mud, we find the aluminosilicate clay, which will then provide the raw material for the making of the geological glue, which is a powerful binder.
Shallow canals and ponds were dug in the soft limestone along the Nile. The flow of water was controlled by locks. These ponds were ideal basins for producing large quantities of muddy limestone. Imhotep's men disaggregated the clay soft limestone at the bottom of the ponds by mixing it with waters from the Nile. They flooded the ponds, mixed the wet, soft limestone and let it dry. The next day they flooded the canals again until the lime and the clay separated, forming mud. Then a substance called natron salt, that is sodium carbonate, was poured in. Salt is a very reactive substance that has a petrifying effect, which is why it is used to avoid the putrefaction of organic tissue. Salt water is the basic element required to make caustic soda. Next, they added lime to the salt water. Lime is the powdery residue left after burning and reducing to ashes sedimentary rocks, such as limestone and dolomite. They also added more lime in the form of firewood ashes, collected from kitchens all over Egypt.
We need two major ingredients to be poured in the reaction pond. That is natron on one side and calcined lime on the other side. Both will react with the water and build the caustic soda, which will then react chemically with the clay which is in the limestone.
Men mixed the ingredients in the ponds until a homogeneous binder paste was obtained. This paste was a powerful natural binder. Imhotep had invented a water-based cement. The workers added more fossil shells, limestone rubble and silt from the River Nile, producing a concrete paste. They carried it in baskets and poured it into hundreds of small wooden molds. Imhotep used molds of 5 different lengths and the same height to make thousands of modular blocks. The blocks were placed in patterns to eliminate the formation of that architect's nightmare, vertical joints that tend to be the weak points in any structure.
These molds had been smeared with rancid oil to facilitate the release of the concrete once set.
The mixture was rammed into the molds as in the making of packed earth, called pisse, becoming a dense re-agglomerated limestone which was let to dry in the shade to avoid its cracking under the glare of the hot sun.
The hardened blocks were released from their molds and carried up to the construction site.
The towering step pyramid was not only the first, but also the only one made entirely of small modular blocks, weighing about 60 kilos apiece, easily carried by 2 men.
By means of wooden ramps and the tiers already set, the men placed each block into its correct place. Imhotep had the pyramid built in 2 clearly identifiable stages. First, he erected a version of the pyramid which, though large, was only half, exactly 50% in fact, of what the whole step pyramid would be when completed. Why the pyramid was built in 2 separate stages, we do not know. But once the whole edifice was finished, this underground vertical shaft was located at the center of the pyramid. This could not have been an accident. Evidently, the immense, awe-inspiring overall plan of Imhotep was carried out from start to finish with expert precision right down to the very last detail. When all the blocks were set in place, an exterior layer of casing limestone was applied. This meant preparing a more sophisticated type of mold to produce inclined limestone blocks and adding to the mixture 2 new ingredients to produce a higher quality stone. Blue minerals, turquoise and chrysocolla, were brought here from the far-off quarries of the Sinai Desert. These minerals were extracted in tremendous quantities during the early Pyramid Age. They gave stone the appearance of a highly polished granite. Thus the pyramid, 60 meters high, could be seen from a long way off, gleaming like a beacon in the reflected light of the sun. Then, using 250,000 tons of stone blocks, Imhotep had this exquisitely fashioned 10 meters high polished limestone wall built to encircle the entire enclosure.
It was more difficult to build even than the pyramid itself, due to its simple and elegant lines with vertical grooves, an inspiration for architects of all succeeding generations. After his death, Imhotep was divinized by the Egyptians, who identified him with Thoth, the ibis-faced divinity of wisdom. The Gnostics called him Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great, founder and origin of their esoteric wisdom. His most tangible and lasting achievement, however, was this step pyramid at Saqqara with its small modular blocks of alchemist stone. Imhotep had not only honoured Num, he had bestowed on his pharaoh, King Djoser, everlasting fame and glory. As we shall see, and we shall see it in the process of construction, the gigantic pyramid of Cheops, one of the seven wonders of the ancient world, would not exist at all if it had not been for the revolution in building technique sparked off at Saqqara by Imhotep.
After the death of Pharaoh Djoser, his successor Sekhemkhet began to build another step pyramid with slightly larger blocks, just a few hundred meters from the original one. He died prematurely and did not see it through to completion. The blocks were later removed for use in other constructions.
The era prompted the priests to continue experimenting with Imhotep's formula to achieve a more rapid hardening, yielding larger blocks of better quality with less work involved.
Huni, the last pharaoh of the third dynasty, built this 92-meter-high step pyramid here at Meidum, with blocks cast in situ weighing between 100 and 300 kilos each. His successor Sneferu increased its height, adding an outer layer of casing blocks, thus producing the first geometrical pyramid. It was a new prototype with smooth, polished surfaces to reflect the sun.
At an unknown date, key support blocks of the casing stones were removed, maybe by Ramses II, who was notorious for pillaging blocks from pyramids for his own monuments.
This set off a chain reaction, produced a cataclysmic collapse, tearing away most of the blocks and leaving this huge pile of stone debris around the original structure. Sneferu, the most industrious builder in Egyptian history, also constructed here at Dashur, some 50 kilometers north of Meidum, two gigantic pyramids during the 24 years of his reign. The Red Pyramid and the so-called Bent Pyramid. The modern name, the Bent Pyramid, comes from the angle of the pyramid's slope, which, as you can see, begins to diminish in the upper half, forming a shape unique among pyramids. It was built partly from pre-cast stones and partly from stones cast in situ. The red pyramid gets its name from the colour of its blocks, apparently a result of experimenting with Imhotep's formula. It is 103 metres high, and its dimensions make it the first truly colossal structure. It has blocks of up to 1 metre high, and their weight suggests they were probably cast on the spot. Another aspect not seen in earlier pyramids is the so-called burial chamber inside the pyramid itself and not underground.
Egyptian priests had perfected Imhotep's formula. They found a way to retard the hardening of limestone concrete by adding borax. This slowing down enabled the builders to cast a very large block, like this one in the burial chamber, over a period of several consecutive days.
To cast blocks of this enormous size might require 3 days. After the workers quit for the day, the unfinished block hardened a little, forming a surface that, when work continued the next day, would leave a line on its side. The process was repeated until the block was finished, leaving lines that are now visible not in horizontal strata as in natural bedrock, but wavy lines, characteristics of material dumped into a mold.
The son of Sneferu, Cheops, also known as Khufu, who reigned for about 23 years, built the 8th pyramid in chronology, the largest of all, the Great Pyramid at Giza, an artificial mountain 140 meters high, equivalent to a 60-story building. Its basic structure is made of 2.5 million large blocks of limestone, laid one upon another in 203 tiers. Each block averages 2 meters in length, and the smallest weigh at least 2 tons. The size of the blocks diminishes gradually from 6 to 2 tons apiece as the pyramid rises. But surprisingly, at the level of the king's chamber, that is, at the 17th tier, the blocks suddenly become so large that they occupy the space of 2 tiers and weigh from 15 to 30 tons each. The largest stones of all are located about 30 stories high in the pyramid, hardly possible unless they were made of agglomerated stone. To do no more than lift a 30-ton block off the ground would require the strength of at least 1,200 men. To raise it to such a height without pulleys or wheels would have been unthinkable. Pulleys and wheels were not introduced into Egypt until 700 years later. So if we accept the theory of most Egyptologists that stones were cut and hauled over wooden rollers or sledges before being placed in position, the only option would be to build a stone ramp over 1 kilometer long that could sustain these enormous weights. The construction of such a ramp, whether circular or straight, would have required more material than the pyramid itself. The rational alternative was to carry the limestone concrete paste in bucketfuls from the mixing canals. As work progressed, the builders could use those already completed tiers of the pyramid to climb up and pour the mixture into wooden molds. One man in a single day could carry a 25-kilo basket or bucket every 30 minutes from the canals to the construction site, enough material to produce a block weighing 4 or even 6 tons. The moulds were waterproofed with cement itself and smeared with rancid oil to facilitate the release of the blocks. This confirms the report of the Greek historian Herodotus that the workers reeked of rancid oil. The workers stood inside the mould, pounding the wet material with a wooden pestle, packing it against a neighbouring block already made, and thus producing the close fit that was inexplicable by other theories.
Hair could easily have fallen and been pounded into the stony material. Same for air bubbles, which could have been trapped during the ramming process. This explains why we found these different features in the blocks of stones. A geochemical reaction bonded the material into a solid stone, thus producing these blocks. Each block was cast against the other. Each block had a very small shrinkage during hardening, and this explains why it produces a very small joint between these blocks. We are on the west side of the Cheops pyramid. This is the place which has been protected against erosion during centuries. It was covered by sand and cleared only 70 or 80 years ago. What we see on the blocks is a weak layer on the top, which is found on all blocks. And this is the result of the aggregate processing technology and the ramming of the stone material. The bottom becomes denser and the top becomes lighter, yielding a weak top layer. Accepting that the blocks were cast in situ, the logistic of the pyramids becomes tremendously simplified. Instead of 200,000 people, the aggregate technology only requires 4,000 to make the monument during the same amount of time.
When the whole structure was completed, its surfaces were covered with some 144,000 casing stones, angled to produce the pyramid's slope. Each stone weighed about 4 tons and was made of fine-grained limestone, so smooth that it appeared to be polished.
A razor blade cannot be inserted between the remaining casing stone, which once covered the entire pyramid. These stones were buried under the sand, and this fact prevented them to be stripped away during the Middle Ages.
Work had now been successfully concluded. But what is to be found inside this gigantic pyramid? Nothing less than another proof, if any further proof were needed, that its stones must indeed have been artificially fabricated. Let's go inside this impressive structure and see what we find there. This low, narrow entry passage does not seem very appropriate for a funeral cortege, which would seem to show that the pyramid was not designed as a burial mound. I'm glad they installed the handrail. This wonderful inclined gallery demonstrates the intelligence and the technical capacity of those who designed and built it. We are now very high up within the pyramid and have just entered what is known as the King's Chamber at its very heart. Its ceiling is provided by 9 huge blocks of granite, weighing each about 50 tons, and each would have required some 2,000 men to hoist it into place. Never before had the Egyptians spanned such a wide space in stone. And believe it or not, there are another 5 layers of similar slabs, one above the other, weighing some 2,000 tons, presumably designed to relieve the stress and also to contain the immense weight of 4 million tons of limestone blocks, which are above this chamber. Do you really think that these huge stones would have been carved outside and then hoisted up here without wheels or pulleys to this height equivalent to a 30-story building, intact and without any damage, and then placed together so closely that not even a simple playing card can fit between them? I find it impossible to imagine. Instead of using 2,000 men to pull each one of these slabs, would it not have been more logical to have carried the ingredients in baskets and molded the stones by simply using the arikat technology which the early Egyptian priests had discovered? As for this great coffer, which has pride of place here, it is made of one single block of red granite. For a start, it is considerably wider than the entrance to this chamber and would never have fitted in the tunnels through which it is supposed to have been transported to this spot. Besides, to carve out the coffer's interior, even today, according to the experts, would require the use of ultrasonic drills with diamond tips rotating at 22,000 revolutions per minute. One can't help wondering why the pharaohs went to all the trouble and expense of building these great monuments. What were they for? What purpose did they serve? We don't know. Nobody knows. Of course, there is much speculation. Most academics believe they were huge burial mounds, but no corpse has ever been found inside a pyramid, so that explanation sounds pretty doubtful. To sum up then, we don't know what the pyramids were for, but thanks to Dr. Davidovits, we now have a better idea about how they must have been built. The size of the stones gradually increased over the pyramid building era, from small blocks weighing a few kilos to enormous blocks and support beams weighing up to hundreds of tons apiece. If the pyramids were built of carved stones, this kind of evolution in size and weight would have been highly unlikely without a corresponding development in heavy machinery. And there's no evidence that such machinery ever existed. After the construction of the early pyramids, culminating with these three at Giza, there was a rapid decline in the size of the structures and in the quality of workmanship. Notably inferior pyramids were built of loose stone and sand, pyramids that were then encased and given their form by surfaces made from agglomerated stone. Today, most of them are little more than heaps of rubble, because this type of construction rapidly deteriorates once the casing is badly damaged or removed.
Why did a prosperous Egypt with this know-how and expertise in man-made stone technology undergo such a spectacular decline in pyramid construction? One answer, among others, is that in order to build their gigantic monuments, pharaohs Sneferu, Cheops and Chephren heavily exploited the Sinai mines, which were exhausted.
100,000 tons of an essential ingredient, the blue minerals, turquoise and chrysocolla, were extracted, enough to produce the 1 million tons of cement and 10 million tons of limestone concrete used in the high-quality casing stones of all the major pyramids. The pharaohs of a later period, unable to build great pyramids due to the shortage of materials, dedicated themselves to profusely decorating their adjacent temples. The depletion of mineral resources was so critical that some pharaohs even pillaged blocks from other pyramids to build their own monuments. The rise of metallurgy allowed the gradual replacement of alchemical stone-making technology. Bronze, an alloy of copper and tin, was introduced into Egypt, and so stone-cutting implements were improved. The monuments that followed were made of a very soft type of rock that can be easily carved. This was sandstone, used to make statues of the kings, as well as the columns, walls and reliefs of the temples. The alchemical formulas were not widely known. They were exclusively guarded by a small group of priests, making it very easy for them to be wiped out of memory during the periods of internal war and invasions that tore Egypt apart. The Arikat technology was lost.
Having examined this whole question to the best of our ability, our team of researchers has come to the conclusion that Dr. Davidovits is very probably right. Of course, his theory may imply the rewriting of a good deal of history, which is probably why it has been largely rejected by traditional Egyptologists. But we should not be disheartened. After all, as Schopenhauer once said, in the revelation of any truth, there are three stages. First, it is ridiculed, then resisted, and finally, accepted as self-evident.